I think we're live, so we have reset the set, and we're back here in the nave of All Saints Church, echoey as it is, and that's part of why we wanted to gather today. We'd hoped to have a very different forum today. Yesterday was supposed to be an incredible celebration of life for our Rector Emeritus, George Regas, and then what we were hoping to do right now is gather a whole bunch of people who had known and loved and worked with George and just spend an hour telling stories about George. And we are going to do that. We're just going to do that in May. Because what has happened is what has happened to all of us, and it's why we're here in an empty church right now, which is this pandemic has just not only kept going, it has found new legs and another wave. And so George's memorial service has been postponed until Saturday, May 7th, which means May 8th is when we'll do the forum with the storytelling. But what we thought we would do today is really just gather a group of folks, of us, together and hopefully have a conversation with all of you. And that piece is really important, and really talk about what does it mean to live and love each other through this time. And certainly the pandemic is a big part of what's going on, but there's also so much else going on. This week we had the first anniversary of the attempted coup at the Capitol, and we also just have so much going on in our lives, and it's a time of uncertainty. And so we wanted to have a conversation, and for you to be a part of it, we're going to use the same text number that we use for prayers. And I'll keep repeating that throughout this hour. That number is 910-TEXT-ASC, 910-TEXT-ASC. The numbers for that are 910-839-8272, 910-839-8272. I'm grateful for you all who are here at the church. And we thought how we would start off is by just briefly introducing ourselves, and then also just talking just a very little bit about how we're doing. And maybe that will help all of us kind of talk about how we're doing in this time. And so I think most of you know me. My name is Mike Kinman. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the rector here at All Saints Church. I've been here since November of 2016. And I'm kind of struggling right now. I mean, part of it is I just put my youngest son on a plane to go back to college, and even if things were going great, that would be hard. But this has been a lot, and it continues to be a lot. And some of the things that I notice in me is that I have more sort of anxiety spikes than I usually have. I also can just start feeling really, really sad. Sometimes it just kind of comes in waves. Sometimes it's so powerful that it's hard to function. And that's something that I'm really feeling. I find that, what I have these images of myself of what I am able to produce, and I realize how much I've bought into that sort of myth of production and worth. And I realize that I'm just not able to do it. If my production level used to be up here pre-pandemic, I used to say it's here. Sometimes it feels like it's about here. And I find myself just in need of as much grace as I think I've ever been in need of. And so, that's kind of who I am and where I am right now. Why don't we start over here? Staci, you want to introduce yourself and just sort of talk a little?
My name is Staci Kennelly, and I'm the coordinator of construction here at All Saints. I think I'm feeling the same as you. I think because we were opening, it felt like things were different. I'm having to, reassess. I'm having to remember that healing isn't, this, but it can be like this, and that includes recovering from a pandemic. And that we're going to have times where we have to come home again. I'm a mom, and my oldest is a teacher, and it's very hard. It's very hard to be a teacher right now, and she is, I think, on my mind a lot, as well as the little kids, So I think I'm having to really the spiritual practices that I have, that's kind of my life right now, is I have to keep coming back to where I find hope, where I find rest. And you know, kind of what you're saying, the production level of where you find your identity. You know, sometimes we can find our identity outside of ourselves. And I think it's so important to come back to that, to come back to who you are when you're just alone, resting. And if we can find, you know, some hope in that, some rest in that, I think that's a good spot to be.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julianne Hines. My pronouns are she, hers. I'm the junior warden here at All Saints Church. And yeah, this has been a really interesting year for me. Some of you may know I have worked for a very long time at Planned Parenthood, and I left that position last spring and have been on what I was supposed to be on sabbatical. It's probably the world's most interesting sabbatical because it's just impacted me so much else. So I'm already in this period of reflection and reassessing my life and my purpose, and then you lay all of this on top of it. And then in addition, I've got some pretty significant family health issues going on unrelated to COVID. But I have a step-parent who is dealing with some very significant health issues. And so going through that when the medical system is already overburdened by COVID can be really confusing, really tough, a lot to navigate, and the support available is just different. I wouldn't say better or worse, it's just different than it would be if we weren't in the midst of a pandemic. So trying to be present for my mother and really being a support for her and for my stepdad, it's been a lot. And then my youngest sister, my baby, she's not a baby, she's my baby, has been in Australia. She lives in Australia, and so she's been there for 2 years and hasn't been able to come back to visit the family. And we finally got her back earlier in December, and now we're not sure that she's gonna be able to go back to Australia for a while. We just have to see, because they are a country who is very proactive about shutting things down. Mm-hmm. So we're sort of monitoring that. So there's just a lot up in the air that I'm realizing I can't control everything, and this is, I think, the lesson the universe keeps teaching me. It's like, you have no control over most of these things in the world, and so how can we live with it, right? And it's just trying to figure out what are all the little ways, what are the little things I need to do. You know, do I need a glass of water? Do I need to sleep with a meditation app next to my phone, because every time I wake up and I'm having a panic attack, I need to listen to the meditation music to go back to sleep, you know, so I can get a decent night's sleep. It's just all those little things, and trying to find the pockets of areas of rest, because I think, you know, it totally resonates what both of you are saying, that it's just the capacity, I think, of how much I could do 2 years ago, and now it's like, I took my Christmas decorations down and was like, man, I need a nap. It's like, what's going on? You know? So it's just, you know, it's different. We're in a different phase. And I like what you said about grace. And I think, you know, the person I need to have the most grace for is myself. You know? And then grace for everyone around when I know tempers are getting short and people are getting frayed, and to say, you know, let's all do some box breathing and take care of ourselves a moment here and just calm down. But so getting through, you know, getting through as best as I can.
Oh, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Monique Thomas. I'm senior warden here at All Saints, and deep breath. Kind of ditto to what everyone has been saying, what all of you have been saying. I live alone, and I don't have any biological family here in California at all. And so my family is my friends and my All Saints community, and not being in community with people. I'm an introvert, so I love being alone. And the first part of the pandemic, I'm like, this isn't so bad. I just get to sit home and, you know, be by myself. It's really hard right now. I do have moments where I feel isolated. And I think the level of having to be intentional and the effort to put into just being with people, making sure that I have my mask, making sure that we're all boosted, making sure that we're outdoors and that we all feel safe. There's no more sense of just jumping in your car and doing something. There's just so much more effort to everything. And it's exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting. It's physically exhausting. I echo what you were saying, Mike. I struggle with anxiety on a good day. And am in treatment, have been in treatment for it. And so this is really, my anxiety has been peaking, moments of sadness. So really just trying to be intentional about what I need to create community. I've been trying to lean into gratitude and grace. And even, in bad times, or good times, that's what I tend to do. And so I've been looking around and thinking about, like I've put on, a couple pounds during the pandemic, but that means that I have food to eat, right? So I gotta be grateful for that, and a wonderful apartment. I have great neighbors. My neighbor made me vegan chocolate cake for Christmas, and right, so I've gotta lean into those pieces, and I also have to be aware of, given that I do feel grateful and I feel gratitude, that there's a lot going on right now, and it's really hard. And I tend to have a lot of grace for everyone else, but not for myself. It's like I expect myself to be better, different, right? And I'm like, wait, hold on, pump the brakes. You're human. You're spending all this time taking care of everyone else. And it's like the oxygen mask on the plane. If I can't take care of myself, then I can't take care of anyone else. And so I've been learning, this is really my learning journey of having grace for myself. What it means to take time and rest and relax, that I'm not as productive, that I get, if I have a list, maybe that list isn't 10 things, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 3, and just sort of working through. And even with work, I work in higher education, and a lot of my work is with students, college students, who they've been struggling with just adjusting from being in an online learning situation for high school and adjusting to college. The sophomores are having a really hard time because their first year was virtual, and we saw that reflected in test scores and just how they're adjusting this year. And so I think just what I'm trying to model for myself and for them is that it's okay to take a moment and to take a break. It's okay to take care of yourself. And I think that's what I want to encourage, and I say that because it's more for me than anyone. But how do I show that grace for myself, and how do I just be patient and take care of myself? So that's where I am. A lot of what all of you are saying.
I'm getting some text messages that the mics are cutting in and out. Are we doing okay, Manny? Because it all sounds fine here. I'm getting some messages from people. We're okay now? Okay. So apologies if there are parts of this that you weren't able to hear so well. So Claudia, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Claudia Shields, member here at All Saints, clinical psychologist, and it's an interesting space to hold, being a psychologist during a pandemic. I am aware of my own denial, I think, sometimes. I'll say to a friend, oh yeah, let's go out for dinner. Oh yeah. We're not doing that. There's a reason I just had my groceries delivered, right? But I'm doing okay one moment at a time. And as long as I stay in this present moment and know that I'm safe right now and I can manage this right now, I'm okay. Yesterday I read about, what are we calling it, Deltacron? The new combination. Yeah, there's a new variant that is the combination of the Delta and Omicron. So I just read that headline, and my mind immediately created an apocalyptic movie. I created this thing that had all the fierceness and lethality of Delta and all the speed and contagion of Omicron. And then I read the article, and it didn't say any of that. So I'm aware of the importance of managing my imagination. I'm an information news hound, so I'm always reading things and texting, this is what I've learned. I freaked out today when I got here and I realized I only had a cloth mask, not my N100 mask, which filters out 95% of particulates except oil, right? So I'm not a risk taker. I like to be in control. I like to know what's going on. And in the pandemic, you can't do any of those things, except you can manage this moment. And so right now, I'm managing this moment, and I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah. Can actually just sort of hold on, and I want to sort of take this from your perspective as a clinical psychologist. Can you sort of, one of the things that's been good about just hearing from you all is just sort of like, oh, it's not just me. And that just, I mean, just sort of normalizes it because, you know, especially like what I find on social media a lot is we can all sort of present this face of ourselves like we're all fine. And so like just even this is really helpful for me. What are you finding, not just in yourself, but what is sort of a normative sort of psychology? What are the things that we're dealing with? And you've mentioned one thing that's really good, which is stay in the moment. Are there other good sort of psychological strategies that can help us?
Honestly, I think that one is really the most effective, and I'll speak to why I think that. Human beings struggle with two things. Isolation is one of them. Isolation can increase depression and suicidal thoughts and suicidal behavior. So when we are isolated in a pandemic, that goes up, and we're seeing that. There's studies that are showing that. The other thing that the pandemic does is it creates uncertainty. We hate that, right? Uncertainty raises anxiety. So there's studies that are showing that both depression and anxiety are going up. One of the things that helps both of those things is staying in the present moment. That is one of the things that I teach my client, and it sounds really simple, but it's a challenge to do. Our brains want to roll forward into the future or back into the past, right? And so Eastern faiths practice, like for instance, yoga, certain forms of yoga is very much about preventing that mental process of moving into the future, projecting into it, or going back to the past. Neither of those are real, right? If you've ever remembered something and then gone back to the video and go, oh, I forgot that part, or oh, I didn't remember it that way. So what we think about the past that's happened isn't real, and the future isn't yet. And so this moment-to-moment practice of sitting in the present is the most powerful advice that I can really give. It helps with depression, is even if you're feeling sad or loss, usually you can manage that one moment of that feeling. And you can move deeply into it. This is one of the things I tell my clients. If you're feeling deep loss, allow yourself to really feel it. Allow your soul to give attention to the pain that it's feeling fully in the moment. And often it transmutes. You'll feel peace where there was pain. And you'll have to do it again probably in the next moment, and you do. But what often happens with depression is we think, I've never been happy. Depression will lie to you and say, life's never been good. Yeah. Depression will make you reflect on the past and see it as worse than it was. And it'll also tell you that the future's not going to be good either. And so you have this sense of hopelessness. But you can manage that one moment. You can feel that and know that, okay, I can do this little bit right now. One of the places I learned that was in childbirth. I could do one contraction at a time. Don't think about the next one, just do this one. Anxiety, same thing, right? Anxiety tends to be about the future. Right? We're usually not so anxious about what's happening right now. It's about the next moment. And so if you can say, all right, this moment right here, I can do. And when the next moment comes, I will have what I need. Because, as we say when we greet each other often, God dwells in you. And if you can remember that that's not just a greeting, but the most profound truth there is, and you can be aware that right now in this moment, the one who created the sun, the stars, the moon, the trees, all of that dwells in you right now. The pandemic gets really small and really manageable.
Yeah, just two things that you made me think of, and I want to jump over to Staci. The first is, one of the things that has gotten me through, it's been a mantra, is this poem by Rainer Maria Rilke. And the section of it is, let everything happen to you, beauty and terror, just keep going, no feeling is final. And so it just is like, okay, I can let it happen to me, and I'm getting chills. I can let it happen to me, I can really try to feel what I'm feeling, knowing that that this feeling will end, and there will be another one after that. And then the other thing that I've realized that and I never thought about this, is I have been so fascinated over the last month by the stories of the James Webb Telescope going out. And I think part of it is, it gives me that sense of perspective that you have. This is a telescope that when it unfurls, it's going to see almost to the, closer to the beginning of the universe than we have ever seen before. And it does sort of put things in perspective. It's like, okay, and the God who created all this dwells in me, dwells in you, and loves us beyond measure. And I find, as I'm scrolling through the New York Times website and not wanting to go to the Omicron stories and find out what the latest turducken of COVID is, and I find I just devour these stories about this telescope. And now I'm sort of wondering, wow, is that why I'm doing that? So, thank you. Yeah. So, how does this translate as you've been seeing directees, and also Staci? I've gotten several texts that people were not able to hear your introduction. So, if you could briefly introduce yourself again, and then sort of talk about this from a spiritual director standpoint.
Yeah, I am so sorry. My name is Staci Kennelly, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the coordinator for spiritual direction here at All Saints. Yeah, I think I'm going to just kind of piggyback a little bit on what you said, in that the same is for our spiritual life. I think it's important that we have things that we can count on, things that can ground us throughout the day. I'm very big on people having daily practices, especially because it's the same every day. It's something you can count on. You can count on your daily practice. A practice that I've been doing lately that has helped a lot is a loving kindness meditation, where you hold someone that really, you are loved by them. You know it. And you hold them in love. And then you hold someone that is difficult to love. And that can be a stranger, right? That can be people that aren't maybe taking the pandemic seriously, or people that it's difficult to love. You hold them in love. And then you hold yourself in love. And I think, that part of just taking that moment every day and holding yourself in love and reminding yourself, you are a human being. You're not supposed to be nailing this pandemic. There's no hey, I totally nailed the pandemic. I did it so good. No one did it better. It's just, that's not the end goal. The goal is you're a human. So how can you love the human in you while still respecting the divine in you? Respecting that you're going to need rest and grace for yourself. Yeah, I hope that answered that.
Okay. Sorry, I just want to write a bit of that down.
I was thinking that, there was, in the lectionary this week, we were talking about the garden, and I was thinking about how Adam and Eve's desire in the garden was to no longer be human. They wanted to be God, right? And that is when the peace and the easiness of the garden left them. And how we do that to ourselves, that we want this idea of being bigger, better, more, something else, besides simply human. Humans need naps. Humans have really bad days. Humans get afraid. So to just kind of settle down in that and be okay with having all the emotions of a human.
Staci, when you made the comment about nailing it, it just really struck me, because I think because we're so goal-oriented, and we're so much about, our culture is competitive and we're goal-oriented, and there is a sense of, how well am I pandemicking? How do I measure with everyone else and check I'm doing, because remember in the beginning when everyone was baking, it was like, no, we got this is great, I'm baking bread, and then it became really real that it was gonna last for a little bit longer, and some of us weren't handling it well, most of us were not. So I love that, of giving yourself permission to just be human, because there is a sense almost of a competitiveness, and social media makes it worse, where we're constantly posting photos of how we're managing it in such incredible ways, but you don't know that in the silent moments of people's lives that, in the darkness at 3 a.m. when it's just you and God, that you're like, oh my God, I'm not okay. I don't know what to do. Like, these photos are up here, but I've got to take care of my family or my students or my whomever. I think it's so important that we're able to just peel back that mask even for ourselves and just be like, you know what, I'm not okay, and that's okay.
Yeah.
This is just bringing up for me. I was listening to a podcast earlier this week, and they talk a lot about doing hard things. And so they had a Q&A, and the people who listen to the podcast were calling in, and a woman had called in and was talking about how, I do hard things really well. I'm predispositioned to that. I lean into it. But then once it's done, I'm left with all of this, like this feeling and this drag because I've been doing the hard thing. And then the only thing I can do is sit and watch puppy videos on social media for, half an hour. And so tell me, how am I supposed to deal with this? And they were like, you're nailing it. Do the hard things, watch puppy videos. That's it. Perfect. You're doing it right. We need those moments of check out. And then, Mike's gonna laugh at me. I am constantly reading Brene Brown and listening to Brene Brown, and I have her new book, and she talks about overwhelm. And
say that word again. Talks about
overwhelm. Being overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed. Oh.
Yeah, overwhelm. And that there's only one cure for overwhelm, and that is to do nothing. Uh-huh. So we can't work ourselves out of overwhelm. And that when there's a difference between being sort of really stressed and overwhelmed, and kind of finding the difference between that, and when we are truly overwhelmed, where we just can't function anymore, right? You have to just shut it down and give yourself 10, 15 minutes of go sit, go outside, go do something where you're just not expected to do anything, because it's the only way you can reset your brain from that overwhelm, is just literally to do nothing. Yeah. And so we need to normalize that and be okay with that, because, especially folks like me, it's no, you gotta fix it. You gotta do something, you have to control it. And recognizing, again, the universe telling me you cannot control everything. And sometimes you have to just shut it down.
Yeah.
I think one of the things too, and that reminded me of just unplugging, because we're so connected to our devices, whether it's the computer or phone or whatnot, and so the stories are rolling through. I mean, just the other day, I think it was on Friday, the 3 men who murdered Ahmaud Arbery have been sentenced to, 2 of them life in prison without parole, right? Which is great news. It felt like justice, but it also brought back up the murder again and sort of all of those things. And so I read about it, I posted something for work, and then I let it go. It's I'm not gonna stay in that. But I think even, you were talking about the puppy videos, and I do that with kitten videos as well, which are very relaxing. But sometimes just putting your device down, because I think it's also a tendency of we wanna escape, and so we use these devices to do that, but it's actually not helping, because you're not actually relaxing, your brain is still going and processing. And so to the extent what's been helping me is to just unplug, go outside, be in nature. Sometimes I'm walking outside and I'll have my headphones on and I'm listening to a nice soothing song, but I'll just turn it off and I'll just stand and just let the air and the sun hit me and listen to the birds above me and the squirrels playing and the little chattering that they do, and just be still. Because I think even with trying to relax with my devices, it's not helpful. My brain is still going. So just one thing that's been really helpful is just as much as we can just breathe and unplug and just be present, staying present. Yeah.
Yeah, there's meditation walks that you can do where you purposely go for this walk and you try to encounter all 5 of your senses and you feel it within you, right? So you go for a walk and you feel your feet with each step. You feel the temperature. You feel whether it's cold or wet or hot. You listen. What are you listening to? What do you see? You know, and you just try to feel all of these, you know, have all of these senses. And again, it will go back to that reminding of your humanity, taking that moment to be still, you know, living in the moment. It's a good, I think that's a beautiful practice.
Yeah. When you talked about the Garden of Eden, that was just like this light bulb moment that went off for me of, and it's what I love about our scripture and the stories, like the creation stories. It's like, it's not literally true, and they're brilliant. They tell us so much about ourselves as human beings. And they just keep sort of unfolding and unfolding and unfolding. And what I was thinking when you were saying that about, you know, we always want to be this great thing and we won't just appreciate the gift of us being human, is that's not just about us as individuals, that's about us as collectives. And it actually reminded me a lot of sort of what we've been going through as a congregation, you know, here at All Saints Church. And we went through, you know, we're going through our sort of second pandemic budget cycle right now. And part of, and you're on vestry, and actually one of the things you've also said on vestry is we need to have more fun together, yes. Which is part of like why it's like we're really looking at that as a congregation is how can we have more fun together, you know, and now of course we're back online, but we still need to find ways to do that. It's why we did things like online movie nights and online dance parties and things like that. We're existing in this place of, you know, between incredible trauma and sadness and incredible need to celebrate, and we're all over the place on the spectrum, and sometimes the difference between me being over here and needing to cry and being to dance is like 10 seconds. And so how do we do that? And sometimes I'm crying and dancing at the same time. Yeah. And so how do we do that? But when we went through our first budget cycle, the vestry went, I mean, I love the process. The process that we have used has been so good. And we said, what are our planning assumptions going to be? And the first planning assumption, and we wrestled with it, because remember, this was like back in May of 2020, where we said, we're not going to go back to the way things were, which was a really incredible thing to say right at the beginning of the pandemic. And we've realized now that, okay, it's true, this is changing everything. And then as we started to come, you know, emerge from what we thought was emerging from the pandemic and come together in person, the gravitational pull, like we started to try to come back just the way that we were. And part of it is that, you know, so much like All Saints is this amazing community. We do great things. We have, you know, Richard Rohr and all these people coming here, and it's just like, and we have, and all of that is great. And that's part of the challenge of it and the seductiveness of it is none of this is bad. It's all, frankly, phenomenal and wonderful, and it's been deeply meaningful for us. And we've had so much loss already in our lives. And then it's like, oh no, we need to get that back. We need to have the music program just as it was or better. We need to have, you know, adult ed and children's, like all this stuff has to be just as it was. We need to keep bringing new people in. And we realized as we were going through this year's budget process, and that was still one of our planning assumptions, we're not going to go back to the way things were. And then we looked at it, and we looked at the gap between what was, frankly, what was income and what was our projected expenses. And Julianne, you asked the great question, which is, what is this trying to tell us? You know, instead of freaking out and saying, what's going on? Just like, no, this is trying to tell us something. What is this trying to tell us? And one of the things is that, A, we're not done with this pandemic yet. We're still in this. You know, we talked last year of, well, this is about building a bridge to this year with this idea that this year would be, well, like, no, we're not there. We're still in this. We're actually starting a strategic direction process to help us really figure out who is God calling us to be. And that's going to have as much to do with what we decide not to do as what we decide to do, because we can't do everything. And we're having these conversations, like we have this huge pull to want to get back and have everything, the way it was, because that was so meaningful. And it feels so good for us. And yet every single one of us has told us that, well, our capacity is way down. And so the idea that we could even do that is just, it's not rooted in reality. And so what we're working with right now, and it's a really wonderful process. And I will say, yes, we're struggling with it. We had a $3.3 million budget or a giving target for this year. Right now we're at 2.6. That's a big gap. And we don't know what's going to happen. And if you haven't pledged yet, please pledge, really, because this is really, really important. And what we're hearing from a lot of you is that this is a really uncertain time. And I think part of that is us just being honest about that. And it's causing us to look at this year differently. And I think, frankly, better. And sort of going back to Eden, we need to allow ourselves to be human and to recognize that there are exciting things happening. Like, I'm living for next Tuesday when Chase starts, when our new associate rector starts. And what he's going to bring. And I'm living for when Alfredo's whole family is actually able to be here. And he's not living this double life in Seattle because they haven't been able to move down because of the pandemic. I'm looking forward to so much. We have so much to be excited about. And we have to allow ourselves to be human. And so part of what we're looking at for this year with the budget, and I have sort of you all jump in, is to say, well, how can we prioritize that? How can we prioritize loving each other, really living into that God dwells in you? And it may not have all the bells and whistles, and it doesn't mean that versions of that may never happen again. It just means for right now, can we just let ourselves be human and recognize that we actually are in Eden if we allow ourselves to be human with each other? Because part of what I've learned in my 5+ years here at All Saints Church is there's a lot of really awesome things about this church in terms of music and program and all. None of it is anything except for the people. It's like what's really awesome about this community is the people. And as long as we don't go anywhere, then we're going to be okay. And if we can just lean into that. And yet it's, I find this huge, and part of my psychology, I'll let you judge whether it's pathology or not, is I tend to be sort of like I'm a people pleaser. I want to live into people's expectations of me. And so I feel like, oh no, I get caught into we have to go back to the way things were. And yet more and more I'm realizing, no, that actually would be a really bad idea. For us. What are you seeing with this?
Yeah, so we had started this conversation prior to the pandemic, interestingly, about sort of our strategic direction, who we were and where we were going, looking at assumptions. We did a lot of work around the assumptions of sort of who we think we are as a church, who we really are and where we're trying to go. And so then when the pandemic hit, we were in the middle of that work. And it's really normal for organizations to do that. I mean, that's part of having a strategic plan is that you have to sort of look at kind of where you are. We're a church that's been around for many, many years, and obviously we have to sort of look at that. One of the most interesting things for me, and again, Julianne is just amazing with whenever we're having these meetings, she stops and she's like, but what is the what? What are we trying to, what is the what? And I use that in my work life now too. But the thing that's mirrored my life and All Saints' life is when the pandemic happened, there were things that I wasn't able to do. There was, my life changed. Everything changed. My assumptions changed. My assumptions about who I am, my assumptions about safety, my assumptions, my priorities, And I had to have this heart-to-heart, in the mirror, talk to myself. At the core of my being, what do I need? If all other things fall away, what is it that I need to be me? And that's the same parallel discussion that we were having as a church, is that things have changed. And we've got this budget, and we've got decisions to make, and we've got, this is the way it's always been, and this sort of works, and this is this person's favorite, and this is this group's. But at the core of our being, and again, people, what is it that we need? And we kept going back to community and this table, right? Why are we here? And aside from that, it's a matter of sort of the how we do that. But the what is the most important part. What is it that we need at the core? And I think for individuals, that's been a question that's been happening through this pandemic. For families, when all things have fallen away, what is it that I have and what is it that I need? And as a church, that's the question that we've been asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that resonates so much with me. The thing that is really coming into my head is, oh my gosh, it like came. And I was thinking of it, and then I was
This is
listening
also
to it.
part of the pandemic.
This is part of the pandemic,
Yeah.
like pandemic brain, because I was listening to you and I was like, Claudia said be in the moment, so I'm being in the moment, listening to Monique, and then what I was thinking went out of my head. But, I know what it was. Dr. Anjali tells us when we know better, we do better, right? When we know better, we do better. And so part of the other thing that I think is really important to bring into the conversation as well is not just the strategic direction work, that we have this timing that we're doing the strategic direction work, but alongside of that, we are also doing this work of really understanding racial equality and racial justice and equity issues, and the work we're doing with CCEJ, the California Conference for Equity, Equality, and Justice, that the vestry and program staff and some of the members of the Racial Justice Advisory Board are engaged in having these monthly workshops and then conversations with each other mid-month, and really getting an education and educating ourselves and being educated. And the biggest part of that is having these really honest conversations with each other, right? Like, I think that's the big part of it, is that it's not just, we're learning, didactic learning this thing. It's we're learning how to have conversations with each other that are open and honest and, not always comfortable, but they are building growth amongst us. And then saying, as the next step is to say, how do we bring this work? How do we incorporate this work into who we are as All Saints Church? And how do we bring it into the greater congregation? How do we bring it into new folks that are coming on, new vestry members, new staff? How do we really, once we know better, do better, and incorporate that into the strategic direction work? That it's not just about, how do we do church better, but how do we bring this equity? How do we address the things like these beautiful glass windows in this church, and what that really means for all of us, right? All of us as a congregation, and how do we address that? And so there's, I think, these multiple conversations that I'd love to say we were really brilliant at the beginning and saying, we're going to line it up all like this. We didn't. It just happened that way, that we were like, we need to do this and we need to do this, and now we're really understanding how those things are working together to really enrich the conversations that we need to have, and I think are going to be really critical to answering that question of who is All Saints right now and what is the aspiration of what All Saints is going to be as we go into the future.
Well, and a way that I see, did you have something, Claudia? Or?
I can wait.
Okay. I see some things tying all these things together. And, from the individual, the psychological, the spiritual, the communal, and a couple things, and I wrote one of them down, and I probably will forget the other one because I'm the same as you. And the first is one of our first, when the CCEJ folks came in and did a vestry staff conference, they had us read this thing on white supremacy culture, and it was so helpful for me, and I really want to see if we can put it out there for everyone to read, because I know at least for me, it's easy to sort of think of white supremacy as this thing, and it's out there, and it's almost like this sort of like disease, and you have it, and you have to get rid of it, and it really is like thinking of it as a culture was really important for me, because first it was just sort of like, this is something that is it's affecting me, actually, no matter how much I know. If I know, I can recognize it and make other choices. But part of this sort of, we have to be the best, that's a part of white supremacy culture. And if we're talking about trying to change that, actually it's about like, oh, okay, how do I actually just let myself be human? And, that whole sort of word supremacy and not be the best human. And so, okay, so how do we do that as a community? How do I do that as an individual? How do I live in the moment? How do I not try to be, the best at pandemicking? Can we let go of all that individually? It's one of the things I love about the Blue Christmas service is we claim this space intentionally to say, this is where it's okay to not be okay. And really that should be 24/7, 365, this is where it's okay not to be okay. But then the other thing is Desmond Tutu talked beautifully about so many things, but one of them was about the church being the alternative community. And where we run off the rails, and we do it all the time, and it's because of culture, is we mimic the society instead of being the alternative society. And what society is doing right now is panicking. And how are we going to survive economically? And how do we continue, how do we double down on a system that squeezes more out of people for less? And I can say, I have, we have this fear of like, oh, if we don't do that too, then the church is going to die. And yet I step back and I look, and it's like, All Saints is not dying. We are actually getting so strong during this pandemic. I look at what's happening with small groups. I look at how we're having conversations like this. I look at new people that are coming in. We're changing. And when you change, aspects of our life die so that other things can come up. And by the way, we're followers of the revolutionary Jesus, so death isn't the end. There's this thing called resurrection. But I'm actually, I'm so excited about the future of this church. And at the same time, I like this voice of, no, you have to do, is so strong. And I just have to keep, I guess it sort of gets back to you, Claudia. I got to live in the moment and remember that. So, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, actually, I was going to ask if there's time for me to show people a really brief exercise that helps you stay in the moment.
That would be great.
Okay. All right. So this comes from my favorite book, which is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And he tells us that our bodies serve as a portal for the now, because our bodies can only be in the present. And so I'm going to invite you to stop and just notice your body. Notice it in space. You can notice your breathing. If your heart is beating when you can feel it, just notice it. Just be curious about it. You don't have to change it. If you're seated, notice the chair or couch under you or whatever piece of furniture you're on. If your feet are touching the floor, you can notice them making contact with the floor. And then you can extend one of your hands, or both of them, sort of outward, with it open. Your fist is not clenched. You're not holding anything. But notice that you know where your hand is, that you can feel it. You can feel the energy in it. That's your life. That's the life force within you. And allow that feeling, that awareness of the life force within you to travel through your whole body. Feel your presence. Feel your life. Notice it. And know that that's where God dwells, in you. All of the power of God dwelling in you is right here, right now, in this space. And you can enter this space any time. It is always present because there is always now. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to invite you all to continue to text your questions or thoughts in 910 text ASC 910-839-8272 910-839-8272. Someone texted in that they're struggling with the loss of routine from the holidays and also the frustration and exhaustion from needing to figure out what a responsible ethical decision is at any given moment, given the abdication of leadership from politicians. That reminds me, during the Obama presidency, I read an article about that there was someone who picked out the president's clothes for him every day. And this was based on some brain science, that every decision we make, we have a sort of a certain, it has a cost to it. And there were so many truly important decisions that he had to make every day that he didn't want to waste any of that energy on even as simple a decision as how do I pick, what should I wear? And this text reminds me, let me look at the language of it again. This is another frustration, which is the Face ID doesn't work when you have masks on, is try to figure out what a responsible ethical decision is at every given moment when we don't have the direction. It just is like the number of decisions that we have to make every day just seems so much more, and the stakes for them seem so much higher. A couple more. How can you be in the moment and be an activist too?
Would you like me to address that one?
Please, go. I have thoughts, but I want to hear yours.
But that really kind of is some of the work of Richard Rohr, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I believe that it starts first with tapping in to the divine, the holiness within you, and trusting that that is going to know what to do at that moment of injustice. It is amazing, and you will, if you trust that process, you'll be amazed at what comes to you to say, to do. In that moment, you will have what you need. It may be a fierceness that's needed. There may be a hard truth that needs to be spoken delicately. Whatever it is, it will come to you as you need it. And it will be more powerful than you might imagine. I'm having this all the time. I was literally on the phone yesterday with someone. We were talking about a concept, and I'm multitasking, and I'm cleaning my room, and I'm trying to make this point. And my hand falls on this piece of paper that I don't even remember seeing, and it literally had something written on it. This happened last night. And I read it to my friend. I said, "You won't believe what I just found." That's like exactly what we were talking about. And so that it's an act of faith, the trust that right action will come to you when you need it to. And there will also be moments where that seems that doesn't happen. Yeah. And you'll be left with the question. Sit in that. Know that that has power in it as well. And trust that.
I've been revisiting just in my mind a lot of Desmond Tutu over the last couple weeks since that great man's passing, and there was no greater activist in the last century than Desmond Tutu. And I remember a story that Bono, the lead singer of U2, tells. And Bono was in South Africa, and they were working with the One Campaign and trying to end global poverty and battle AIDS and all these really, really important things. And he was waiting for Archbishop to show up at a meeting, and as happens, it got later and later and later, and finally Archbishop Tutu shows up, and the first thing he says is, okay, well, we need to go off, all of us, and spend some time in prayer. And Bono's like looking at his watch and saying, no, we're already really late. Do we really have time to pray? We have so much to do. And Archbishop Tutu said, the more we have to do, the longer we need to pray. And I try to always remember that is, talk about the urgent crowding out the important is, how can you be mindful and an activist? There's actually, I don't think, any way to be a successful activist without being mindful. I think you ended up being unrooted and unstrategic, in all that go.
And incredibly burned out.
Yes.
I'll tell you, so I worked in the state legislature and then I ran public policy for Planned Parenthood for 17 years. And so I understand that mindset of being an activist and thinking you have to be up on all the things and know all the things and have your finger on the pulse of all the things. And you can do that, and there is a cost. There is a cost to your physical health, to your emotional health, to your spiritual self, to your being, and that is burnout. And I would just beg of you all, do not go 17 years sitting in burnout. It's not good for anybody, because then you have to go on sabbatical and a pandemic happens. And that's not fun. So yeah, I would just say, Claudia has given us the key, and that is really being in the now, and I think that applies to this as well, is that you can be an activist, and the first step is you have to take care of yourself. As Monique said, you have to put the oxygen mask on, and you've got to take care of yourself because you cannot give what you do not have.
Yeah, and I would say also because there are so many injustices right now. I mean, there's just so many things and so many intersections that in order to even know where to go, where to start, you need to sit and be peaceful and be silent and just for direction sometimes. And particularly when you're leading other people, you need to have your compass together and have your silence and your direction. And so to me, again, like what you were saying, and Claudia, about the being present, that you have to center yourself, because otherwise you get swept up in everything and you don't know where to go in terms of movements. And so I think that it's so important. It's so important to center yourself to do this work.
There's a scripture, I think this is Romans 8:28. All things work together for good.
Good.
And so that's one of the things that helps me stay in the present and move to a place of acceptance. So a big part of the staying in the now is accepting what's happening in the present and knowing that whatever it is and however it appears, there really is only good if all things work together for good.
For the good.
So that's a helpful reminder for me.
Yeah. Staci, do you have a final word also? No? Okay. We got 1 minute. I wanted to just read this text that came in. In mindfulness, yesterday I was blessed with applesauce, and with each bite I enjoyed the cold, the sweet, and the smooth with gratitude and wonderment. Literally one moment at a time, one spoonful of mindfulness and peace. In the moment, I was free of the anxiety and questioning. The present moment is all we truly have, and your gifts of sharing is my present moment's blessing. Thank you. So I want to thank you all for making this present moment meaningful for me. I want to thank you all for being a part of this present moment. And I am so grateful just doesn't even touch how I feel that God has drawn us together to be on this journey together for such a time as this. We are well equipped, for God dwells in us and in you. We're going to bring this session to a close. Claudia, Monique, Julianne, Staci, thank you all so much. Yes?
We have an offering. Christine Hartman and I have been doing a once a month, 90-minute spiritual location exercise. It's on Saturday. The next one is on Saturday, January 29th at 10 a.m. It is via Zoom. And it's just time to spend 90 minutes kind of looking inward, looking at yourself. And then there's time to talk with one another. And then if you do join us, I will be available within that next month if you would like to speak about any kind of mindfulness practice, anything that might need to come up. So that is an offering that we have this month if you want to set some time aside and just for you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Staci, and thank you all. We're going to get the space reset. We have worship in 15 minutes at 11:30. Hope you will be part of that. Next week, our forum and our preacher is the Reverend Dr. Will Gaffney, talking about the Women's Lectionary, talking about the work that she's doing, continuing on Womanist Midrash. It is going to be a barn burner, so make sure that you tune in with our scholar and community, the Reverend Dr. Will Gaffney, and we'll see you in just a few more minutes for Eucharist. Amen. Bye. Thank you.